There are a lot of people, men and women, but women that get victimized by it, are not aware that women do not have equal protection under the law. They don't have it constitutionally, and they don't have it pragmatically. And you don't realize that until you wind up in the court system and there's somebody up there saying, HIPAA be damned, confidentiality be damned, and all of the rules of evidence that apply in other crimes all of a sudden are thrown out the window.
Right.
And all of these things that you can't bring up in a robbery case or you can't bring up in a murder case about pre-offense information that never gets in front of a jury, all of a sudden is paraded out in front of the jury about a victim that has been brutally raped. They can now talk about what she did in high school, what she did in college, what she did at a party 3 weeks before this happened. And you're sitting there saying, wait a minute, this predated the offense. What the hell does this have to do with what happened that night?
Yep.
But yet it's admitted and it's not reversed on appeal when it is clear violation of the rules of evidence. So It doesn't happen just at the trial level, it's upheld at the appellate level.
Yeah, exactly right. So when I've argued countless appeals in these cases, and I've made this point that you cannot treat these types of victims differently. It's just a violation of equal protection of law. And I make all these arguments that are about the Constitution being designed to protect everybody equally and give everybody equal rights. And generally speaking, the courts say back to me, but you're wrong, Ms. Murphy. Women aren't entitled to equal treatment and equal protection of law under the Constitution. You need to fix the 14th Amendment and then come back and make that argument to us. And boy, is that a hard pill to swallow, to be in a court of law where there's some sign on the wall that says equal justice under law. And that's just not right. I give you a couple of good examples that apply specifically to therapy records that were devastating in cases. And this continues to happen today. One, I was representing a woman who'd been nearly killed by a man who had also brutally raped and killed other women. And she was brave enough to testify against him, and he demanded access to her counseling records that predated this man's brutal assault of her. We fought like hell to stop those records from being turned over, because when she had therapy, she was told by her therapist that was a private session, that what she was saying was confidential, and she needed that promise of confidentiality in order to be open about her feelings and to get better. But the judge basically, and when I challenged the judge who ordered the records turned over, I said, what does this have to do with anything about what happened the night he beat her? Why aren't you ordering her to turn over her grocery receipts if you don't care about relevancy, right? The judge slammed his gavel and said, Ms. Murphy, if you keep talking, I'm going to dismiss the charges and this man will walk free. That's what it came to. So my client starts sobbing. She begged me to give him anything he wants. If this man gets out of jail, he's going to kill me. Please just give him my counseling records. So we did. In the records, there was a description of her being sexually abused by her dad when she was a little girl. No one knew about it. Her family didn't know. And of course, what did that man use as evidence during the trial? That she had been sexually abused by her father, and she was now falsely accusing him in order to avenge her childhood experience. She ended up winning the case, but what a price to pay that had to be revealed to the whole world, because the news was covering the case. Her family found out. Everyone learned something that should have been confidential, had nothing to do with the case, was deeply personal to her. And that's a price for justice that we only impose on women, and it's outrageous.
Well, it is outrageous, and it is a clear violation of the rules of evidence and what is admissible. And so they just, at that point, ignore the rules of evidence and say, we're going to suspend those because this is a woman.
Yep.
I'm not a lawyer, but the rules of evidence are very clear. And so a judge has to just say, I'm going to ignore this rule of evidence and admit this and let the jury see it, let the press in the room see it, And I don't understand how a sitting judge can ignore the rules of an evidence because of the sex of a victim. It's mind-boggling.
It is mind-boggling. It's also, in my opinion, unconstitutional. But when push comes to shove and I make the constitutional argument before appellate courts, they remind me that women are not yet equal under the Constitution. We are not yet entitled to equal treatment or equal protection of law. And what that means, and it's very obvious, you see it statistically in the high rates of abuse of women in this country. What that means is when you call the police or report an incident of violence against women to prosecutors and they decline charges or file charges and have the rules of evidence not work fairly, there's nothing you can do about it. I mean, that's really the bottom line here. There's nothing you can do about it. And I like to point out to people that, here's equal protection of law. Here's unequal protection of law. Here's where women are. That space in the middle is where rape and domestic violence and abuse happens with impunity under the law, because this is equal treatment and this is where women are. And everything in the middle is where violence happens with impunity. And there's nothing you can do about it, constitutionally or otherwise. You can't complain about it, because if you complain about it, the courts are going to say, we're sorry, but you're going to have to fix the Constitution and come back to us later.
People ask me sometimes, Dr. Phil, you often say that rape is one of the most underreported crimes in the country, because I've said, 1 in 4 women are the victim of sexual violence. And at that, it's underreported. Why? These are the reasons why. What we've been talking about is the fact that they are subjected to these pre-offense audits of their life, and everything in the world is pulled out. Like you said, a woman had to out the fact that things had happened to her with her father before, where she had been raped by him. Then I've seen cases where they then take that and pull out research that says when that happens to a child, they often become promiscuous. And then because of the promiscuity, they wanted this. They use it to spin it against them psychologically. They go into their dating histories and put them on trial. All of these things are underreported, and that's why a lot of them don't come forward and bring charges against the person.
Rape is very underreported, always has been. And that's partly because we do make it painful to seek justice. Justice should not be painful. We should be celebrating people who are reporting crimes, whether it's a drunk driver, a bank robber, or violence behind closed doors. It's all violence against society. It's all crime against society. And it's not a private problem just because it happens behind closed doors. I think we forget that sometimes. So we need to reward people who come forward, treat them as heroic. Because when people speak, when they talk about crimes that happen, no matter where they happen, it helps prevent crimes against others. That's one of the benefits of the criminal justice system. It deters other people from doing the same things. So if you keep pushing victims away of certain types of crimes, if you keep messaging them that it's going to be painful for them to participate in the legal system, you're basically telling others in society, don't bother. Don't bother because, it's not worth it. On the other hand, look how we treat people who witness arsons and bank robberies and drunk driving. Boy, they're up on a pedestal and we can't do enough for them, and we don't ask them about their mental health backgrounds. You can literally be an eyewitness to a drunk driving with a long mental health history that may well affect your credibility. Nobody asks. Nobody asks because we want those people to come forward. We want to celebrate them as heroes in society for reporting violence. We really need to bring that philosophy to bear on all forms of violence, including crimes that happened in the family, behind closed doors. Every crime that happens, no matter where, is a public injury. It hurts all of us. And we don't think that way when it comes to violence against women. And that's one of the reasons we don't really get as upset as we should about the fact that so many victims don't come forward. You just don't see the outrage about the lack of reporting. In fact, if anything, you'll even see from advocacy groups, which makes me crazy. They'll say, oh, we have to respect the fact that this rape victim doesn't want to come forward, doesn't want to testify. We have to protect the victims from the trauma of the system. That's crap, if you ask me. That is insanity. Because it's like indulging a terrorist. Well, the system is so terrible, let's just not bother with justice. No, stand up, fight, demand justice, kick back. If you're mistreated, make a stink about it. That's how change happens. You have to participate and complain to make reforms real. Just saying, I'm not going to call the police or I'm not going to report my domestic violence case because I'm worried the system isn't going to treat me with respect. You're just rewarding the bad system. Not to mention, you're going to get beaten again and again and again, and it's going to escalate. And other women are going to see that that you're doing that, and so they're not going to call, and so on and so on. This is how we create a culture of tolerance for violence against women. And it's not easy for me to say to my clients. It's not easy for me to say to my clients, you should testify because they think I know better than them. That's not my meaning. When I try to encourage them to testify, it's because I don't like rewarding the systemic injustices. It's just not fair to my clients or to women as a class.
Well, undoubtedly, what you're saying is true. You don't reward bad behavior and you have to push back. The problem is, and I got to put my shrink hat on here for a minute, we find victims all up and down the psychological continuum. And some of these victims are truly psychologically damaged before, by, and after what has happened to them. They just simply don't have the psychological wherewithal. They don't have the stamina. They don't have the emotional resources. They don't have the support system to endure the onslaught. And when they get held up to ridicule, like the client you talked about that ultimately won, but the family was dragged into all of this disclosure and all, there are some people that are severely depressed. They maybe have suicidal ideation. They may be on the brink of psychosis, or they may have issues that when you add the burden of all of this on top of it, they just simply don't have the mental emotional resources to carry that burden. So they can take one for the team, but you lose them in the process. They either become so broken, withdrawn, commit suicide, check out in different ways, and not everybody can do it. I've had a patient when I was in private practice in the situation where I knew very damn well they couldn't do it. Yeah. They weren't the one to charge up that hill and fight that battle because they would never make it to the top.
It's a really important point, Dr. Phil, and let me clarify what I was talking about, because I would never, ever force someone to testify if it was going to hurt them. I would never do that. But here's what I want people to know. The system that indulges the idea cavalierly that it's too stressful to testify and just does it across the board, just lets women drop the charges or not testify because they don't feel like it or they're scared. The problem with that approach is that you're teaching the offender to threaten, intimidate, bribe the witnesses. And you're really giving complete control over the criminal justice system to the bad guys. That's number one. And that's a really important thing to remember. So my policy approach is not to always force victims to testify, but to have all prosecutors' offices have as a policy a presumption that the case will go forward and that the victim will be expected to testify, because this is to message the bad guy, don't bother trying to threaten her, intimidate her, harass her into not testifying. You're not going to get anywhere. It's just not going to work, and we're not going to indulge you. There's actually some research from California that shows the benefits of my policy, my approach. I didn't come up with this idea. This is research from many years ago. In year 0, there were something like 50 domestic violence homicides. And that year, they adopted a policy which is called a no-drop rule, that once a domestic violence case is reported, it has to go through and the victim has to testify, no exceptions. They did this for 5 years. And at the end of the study, the domestic violence homicide rate went down to single digits. And that only policy change they made was that no-drop rule. So they know that that was the reason women's lives were saved. Now, were some women forced to testify? A couple. Was it stressful? Absolutely. Was it worth it? A lot of lives were saved. Now, I still think if a woman can't testify because it's too psychologically overwhelming, you have to respect that. But if the reason she's not testifying is because she has no resources, she doesn't know where she's going to live, she has no money, she's afraid she's going to lose custody of her children, then my solution is don't indulge her fears. Give her a place to live. Give her free counseling. Give her the tools and the things that she needs to be able to become a strong person. Don't just say it's okay that you're so traumatized and suffering, we're going to leave you be. Take advantage of the opportunity to give her what she needs to become strong and hold the charges open until she is strong enough. Reward her. Reward her. We have to turn this into a system of rewards.
Yeah, that's an alternative if they can fund that, but that takes a lot of money and a lot of time, and that may drop to single digits, but you got to wonder how many cases weren't brought because the woman said, no, I won't testify, so don't bring the case. It may have dropped to single digits for the ones that were actually brought, but you wonder how many said, no, I won't because I can't. But you did what you're saying, where you said, look, we will support you, we will protect you, we will get you to the point where you're okay to do this before we ask you to do it. Then you've got a different situation.